In 2015, Mountain View, this 6,000 square foot octagonal plantation house, was designated as one of Virginia's most endangered historical structures. That led to Mountain View being included on the list of the top 5 historic plantation houses in the state. It sits on a list with George Washington's Mount Vernon and Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. Monticello, however you say his stupid name. I'm Johnny Ashley in The Hood in the Woods, your neighborhood backwoods history and travel channel. You can find me on Facebook as The Real Hood in the Woods and on Instagram as Abandoned in Appalachia. Now, if you'd like to help me out and help yourself out too, you should get the official copy of The Hood in the Woods books, Volume 1 and Volume 2. The link will be in the description. Another thing in the description is going to be a link to my other YouTube channel, The Family Court Guy. Welcome to Smyth County, Virginia. On July 23, 1609, a fleet of 9 ships was hit by a hurricane. The fleet was called the Third Resupply and was bringing supplies to the only British settlement in America, Jamestown, Virginia. For 3 days and 3 nights, 400 settlers and sailors were tossed around like rag dolls. When the storm was over, 7 battered ships reached the Chesapeake Bay. The largest one, called the Sea Venture, was missing, and everyone assumed it sunk. That ship was carrying most of the supplies, as well as the new governor of the colony and the admiral of the fleet. Another person on that ship was a man called Stephen Hawkins. He was no one special, an indentured servant who had signed a contract with the Virginia Company, exchanging a few years of his labor in return for a trip to Virginia, food and shelter. Now, 150 people from that ship, which had been damaged during the storm, were stranded on an island near Bermuda. No humans lived on the island, but there was plenty of game for the settlers to hunt and fruits for them to eat. The settlers were pretty happy. They figured they had it better here than they would in Virginia. Governor Gates had no intention of staying there, and he began directing the settlers to build a new ship. Stephen Hawkins said, "Slow your roll, Governor. While you are correct, I did sign a contract agreeing to work for you. It was in exchange for food, shelter, and clothing, which you have not provided since we have been shipwrecked." Well, this put the governor in quite a pickle, because the usual punishment for mutiny was to be stranded on an island, which they already were. And it's not really much of a punishment to leave someone on a stranded island if that's where they wanted to be left. To build a ship and get to Jamestown, the governor would need the settlers' consent to govern them. Well, not really. He had soldiers with guns to make people do what he wanted them to, and Stephen Hawkins was lucky to get off that island alive. A year later, the ship was built, and they finally reached Jamestown. In Jamestown, Hawkins finds out that his wife died, so he heads back to England to go get his kids. While he was in England, he got remarried, but he still wanted to come back to America. Then in 1620, he loaded them all up onto a ship going to the New World. The people making this trip wanted religious freedom. This wasn't a big ship like last time. It was a little busted ship that no one else wanted. It was called the Mayflower. They were aiming for the Hudson River, but they missed and landed near Cape Cod. After landing, they drew up the Mayflower Compact. That created a civil body government through the consent of the 41 people that signed it. The next time consent of the governed would come up in American history, it would be the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. Hopkins has never officially been credited with coming up with the wording for the Mayflower Compact, but he still went down in history for another reason. He's the only person credited with being at the original Jamestown settlement and the original Plymouth settlement. His wife, poor lady, is the only person documented giving birth on the Mayflower. The Hopkins family stayed in New England for several generations until John Thomas decided to move to Virginia. First, he moved to Southampton County by Jamestown. He married a Virginia girl named Mary, and in 1766 they had a son, Thomas Jefferson Thomas. In 1771 they moved to the Wild West, aka present-day Smyth County, Virginia. Here they would have 6 more kids. Their eldest child, Thomas, he became a man of wealth and influence in the county. He became the county land surveyor, the sheriff, and the justice of the peace. And on top of that, he controlled 400 acres of his family land. Thomas married a Virginia girl called Free Love, and they had 4 children. The youngest of those children was Abijah Thomas, and he was born in 1814. Thomas and his wife Free Love, who seriously have like the coolest names I've written so far, their house would have been like right around here. And in that house where the meetings would have been that would have began the formation of Smyth County. The story is, to make the county, they needed to make a town to serve as the county seat. Free Love Thomas suggested that they name the town after Revolutionary War hero Francis Marion. You might not recognize that name. but he is who Mel Gibson's character in the fictional movie The Patriot, that's who his character is based on. Fictional movie. Abijah married a lady named Priscilla, and they had 12 children. From an early age, Abijah had been operating the family farm. As he got older, he accumulated another 10,000 acres of land. The downside was he was doing everything to get this land except paying for it, and he was kind of running like a Ponzi scheme. That's going to come into play a little bit later on. Most of the pre-Civil War South's economy was based on agriculture, so what he did with the land was a little bit different. While most wealthy landowners in the pre-Civil War South were happy to operate their plantations, Abijah had bigger aspirations. In 1844, Abijah bought a 344-acre tract of land. It was about a mile away from his house. It sat on the South Fork of the Holstrom River, and there was already a sawmill and a grist mill on the land. In 1860, he opened a textile factory called the Holstrom Woolen Mills, and soon a town began to form around it. During the Civil War, Company A of Virginia's 23rd Battalion Infantry was organized here, and the woolen mill, they provided cloth to the Southern Army to use as uniforms. Abijah also operated an iron furnace. During the Civil War, it produced goods for the Southern Army, until the Northern Army came and destroyed it.
Abijah Thomas built this octagonal house in 1857. Beginning in the 1850s, octagonal houses began to grow in popularity. In a book published by Orson Fowler, he claimed that the octagonal shape encloses 1/5 more floor space than the square shape, while using the same total length of wall. According to the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, Mountain View is the most sophisticated representation of Orson Fowler's octagonal architecture. The house originally had a C-shaped wraparound porch that it went 3/4 away around the house.
The bricks were made by enslaved people out of clay that was dug here on site. And if you look closely at some of these bricks, you'll see it right here. These are fingerprints of the people who made them. People now are looking at these fingerprints and they say because of the size, they most likely came from children. Due to the unusual shape of the corners, a special mold was used to make 450 coffin-shaped bricks. The house's foundation is made out of this sandstone, which is cut to follow the octagon shape.
The exterior walls of the house are 4 layers of brick deep, and the house has 17 rooms, 6 closets, and 6 fireplaces. The home had 10 bedrooms, a parlor, sitting room, winter kitchen, dining room, living room, and office. The house had 32 windows, and the ones on the second floor are 9 foot 6 inches tall. This is the front parlor, and it's another reason why the octagonal house is so historic. It was covered with fresco paintings on the ceiling and oil paintings on the wall.
Mantels, baseboards, and some walls were painted to resemble marble. Now what this was the mastery over nature, where they didn't actually need to carve the marble to put it in their house. They could just paint it. This was common during the Victorian era for the wealthy to decorate their house like this, but the Octagon house far exceeds what was normal. A traveling French painter came to Smyth County, and he specialized in doing stuff like this. Needless to say, he left this place pretty rich. The entire front parlor was painted to look like it was pink and blue stonework.
These are some of the hand-painted baseboards that are in the bedroom. Because of the difference of floor plans between the upstairs and the downstairs, the second floor has a room in the center of the house. It is the only room without a window. It is called the dark room. It also is the only square room in the house. Lots of people have called Abijah ahead of his time because he diversified from only doing agriculture. I must disagree. He didn't listen to the wise words of his ancestor, Stephen Hopkins, who while enslaved in Bermuda came up with consent of the governed to be governed. Abijah had hired employees, but his businesses were based on the labors of enslaved peoples. After the Civil War, when their consent was required, a lot of people chose not to come back and willingly work for him. Not long after, his businesses began to fail, and he couldn't pay his bills. This brought down his Ponzi scheme. Multiple creditors filed lawsuits against his estate. His thousands of acres were reduced to only a few hundred. In 1875, Holstrom Mills opened up under new ownership. The next year, Abijah Thomas died in his beloved octagonal house. Eventually, the Octagon was sold at auction, forcing Miss Thomas to live with her children until her death in 1885. Under the new management, Holstrom Mills did well, and the town grew around the mill. I guess technically it wasn't called Holstrom Wooden Mills until the new ownership. But under the new ownership is when the town really grew. Soon there were shops, a school, a post office, and a telegraph office. It's all good till it's all bad, and in 1890 the mill was moved to Salem, Virginia, leading to the town's decline. Eventually all the buildings were reclaimed by nature.
Max Sturgill was born in Smyth County in 1927. Besides going here and there for college, he was pretty much a lifelong county resident. And when I say here and there for college, what I mean is like he went to college in like Madrid, Spain, and Havana, Cuba, back when you could do that. After graduating, he taught at Princeton and several universities more local to Southwest Virginia. He came back to Smyth County to care for his ailing mother, and he stayed here for the rest of his life. He sat on the Chamber of Commerce. He was the president of the Historical Society. He was on the Tourism Committee. He did a bunch of stuff like that. He was a, quote, historical gossip, and he had written 4 volumes of history about Smyth County cemeteries. And I'm sure right now he is super duper excited into getting to be in my historical thing about a Smyth County cemetery. He wrote another book called Hungry Mother, History and Legends. Hungry Mother is a local state park, and he said the name and the legend to go with it was all just an advertising ploy that was made up.
Another book he wrote was called Abijah Thomas and His Octagonal House. It was published in 1990. The book is now very rare and sought after by collectors. A lot of my story would not have been possible without his research for his book. This is the dining room. I was told they had a 20-foot table in here. After Mountain View was sold at auction, it passed through lots of hands. The house was turned into apartments, used as an apple storage facility and a tobacco barn. The last time it was used was in the 1940s, and in the 1970s the county condemned it, meaning that it would have to be brought up to code before it was used again. In 2014, the house had been empty for 80 years, and the last private owners of the house, along with a group of relatives and friends, formed the Octagon House Foundation. The house and the lands were gifted to the foundation for restoration. In the description box of this video, I'm going to have a link to their nonprofit if anyone would like to donate a few dollars to their cause. I'd sincerely like to thank Derek Orr. None of this would have been possible without his cooperation.
That's my video. I hope you liked it. If you did like it, you need to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. Don't be watching my stuff for free. If you like this, here's a couple more videos you should check out.